From there, I went to see Amy Klobuchar at a union roundtable that wasn't too far away. That was an unusual event. There were at most a dozen spectators, and they were outnumbered by the media. As we were setting up in this small room, which you'll see in the video, I asked the TV camera persons there, most of whom, by the way, are women, who they were from. And we had ABC, CBS, and Fox. While we were missing NBC, before the event started, another TV camera was set up, and I didn't get a chance to ask who it was. It was probably the local NBC station.
So we're going to do a speech tonight on kind of a bigger event, but I thought it would be good to start this discussion with just a focus on the reality of what's going on in our economy here in Iowa and across the country, so that we can make it clear that this isn't really just about one candidate or one idea. It's something that we must change if we're going to be able to respond to the needs of workers in the future. So you all know my background, which is a heavy-duty union background. My grandpa was an iron ore miner who worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines up in Ely, Minnesota, and he never got to graduate from high school and save money in a coffee can to send my dad to a community college. The union saved his life because before the unions came in, the mines were very unsafe and people were dying all the time. Then my dad comes along. He goes to that community college, graduates from the U of M, and becomes a newspaper man, where he worked his whole life, and a member of the newspaper guild. My mom grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She moved to Minnesota because they had strong teachers unions and taught second grade until she was 70. Back then, you couldn't keep working when you were pregnant, so my mom had to quit teaching, actually, when she was pregnant with me, but then she went back to teaching after my parents got a divorce. And again, she worked at basically the same occupation, but in different school districts her whole life. But we know all of that is changing right now with this gig economy. And we have several things going on here. One is, of course, the globalization of our economy. One is income inequality. We have a situation where a CEO of a Fortune 500 company hauled in on average 361 times the compensation of the average American worker. We have an economy where for a small percentage of people everything is great, but for a lot of people it is hard to pay for things. Whether it is health care, whether it is sending your kids to college, or whether it is a simple cable bill. So that's what's been going on in our economy. And we've had some stagnant situations for a lot of people that are in really most of the income brackets, except for the top one. We have also a president right now who claimed that he wanted to do a lot to help regular people, but that just doesn't happen. And Exhibit A for that is the tax bill. When he went down to Mar-a-Lago and told his friends, "I just made you a lot richer." Well, I think that really set it off, that that's what he was doing. And I have a different plan. I want to go, when I'm president, to our union halls to make sure that we make clear that a union job means that you can have a high quality of life and raise a family. I want to go to the farms and our rural factories and say I'm going to stand with rural America. And I want to go to our senior centers to make sure our seniors know that someone has their back when it comes to paying for long-term care and prescription drugs. And I want to go to those factories that we've seen shut down, some of them right here in Iowa, and say you're not alone. We're going to invest in your community and not leave you behind. So what an optimistic economic agenda means today, it's to look at the changing workforce and the changing way you work and say, how are we going to make this work? We can't just look back a century ago. How are we going to make this work now when it comes to making sure that you get good school, that you're able to go to college or get whatever kind of path to success you want, a 1 or 2 year degree, that you make sure that you've got decent retirement. And then we make sure that people are able to get a good wage, and that means union organizing, especially when it comes to some of these new jobs that we're seeing out in our economy. I call it a competitive agenda, the simple idea that we should be a country that makes stuff, that invents things, and that exports to the world. How do we get there? Well, the first one is to realize that the digital revolution isn't coming, it is here. And my agenda begins with addressing these digital disruptions, updating our consumer protection and privacy laws, making sure that we beef up our cybersecurity, and taking on monopoly power. But what this also means is in this new digital economy, there's all kinds of new jobs, and many of them are contract workers, many of them are people who work at home, many of them are people that have multiple jobs to be able to make it. So today, more than 1 in 3 workers are in the gig economy, according to Gallup. And that includes working as independent contractors, online platform workers, contract firm workers, on-call workers, and temporary workers. So we have to remember that we need an economy that works for them. That means things like helping people save for retirement. And this is actually a interesting bill that I've introduced with Senator Chris Coons of Delaware that actually as president I could get done. It's called Up Savings Account. And what it does, and supported by SEIU and a number of other groups, and what it does is it says to these workers, okay, especially if you're in a small workplace that doesn't have a pension or doesn't have a 401k, your employer has to start putting aside 50 cents an hour for your retirement. And we actually have ways we pay for it to make it easier for them to do that. 50 cents an hour, and if you add that up over time, it's $600,000 that could supplement Social Security or maybe other income when you go work at another place that does have a 401k or a pension. That is really fits these workers because they work in multiple jobs. We'd let them take them to jobs. We'd let them do it if it was part-time. And it also allows them to take out the first $2,500 for an emergency expense. Right now, we have nearly half the people in this country can't afford the $400 for an emergency room expense. So that's one idea. In Iowa, nearly 25% of the people said that they have less than $10,000 saved for retirement, and another 18% have nothing at all. So think about that. Another piece of this is making sure that we have health care that works. And I'm not going to go into the whole health care proposal today because we could be here for an hour. But you know what I favor here is a nonprofit public option, which allows people to buy into that. That works especially well for workers in the gig economy. And we have to make sure they get covered as well to get child care and that they're able to get work family leave. All of the proposals that I have put out there would apply to them too because they would be federal programs that they wouldn't depend on through their employer in terms of the child care and the work family leave. Another piece of this is consumer protection laws and making sure that those are in place. Privacy, I've been one of the leaders on that. And it's unbelievable to think we've had all these changes in our economy, and there's been no change in Washington when it comes to privacy laws. I'm talking here about everything from data on your Fitbits. That's a legislation that I lead when it comes to making sure that that ownership of that data is with the person that has that data. And then also when you put your information and give it to internet companies. We have multiple examples of them making money off of you, and you lose your right to privacy. So we just introduced a major bill that as president I could get done, Senator Cantwell, Senator Schatz, and myself, that would make it very clear that you've got to opt in. You have to be able to say, no, I don't want to have my data shared. And then if they change the status of your data, that you can change that. So that's worth looking at. I also believe that if there's a breach, you should be notified in 72 hours, and that's another bill that I have. And these are all changes that have been really instigated because of this digital economy. Antitrust, really the antitrust movement got its founding in this state with the Granger movement in Minnesota and Iowa, Nebraska, the states in the middle of the country. And this is, of course, many, many decades ago. But the idea was there was too much power consolidated in certain hands, and that hurt people. Back then, it was the rail companies, And it was some of the ag companies and others that made it harder for farmers to be able to make their way. And things were getting more and more expensive. That's how we got labor laws, and that is how we got antitrust laws. So making sure, so we learn a little bit of a lesson from that, from what's happening right now, making sure we make it easier for our workers to organize, like taking on collective bargaining rights for our public sector workers, but then also making sure that we have the ability to organize in terms of these contract workers and that they're not shut out. Another piece of this is changing the antitrust laws to make it easier to review these mergers and deals. We're in a startup slump in this country. We've lost a number of our startups over the years. We're 30% down when it comes to startups. And a lot of that is because of the consolidation that's going on in our country. It's really hard to start when you're competing against big guys. Or let's say you start a company called Waze. You guys know what that is on the internet to help you find better directions? It was a really, really great thing. It just got bought by Google a few years ago. Google has Google Maps. Waze was a major competitor of theirs. Now they're both owned by the same company. That is what keeps happening in this technology sector. And so a lot of this is looking back at these deals and making sure they're good for America. And if they're not, making changes to them in terms of the approval. Another piece of this is they're respecting, in my friend Sherrod Brown's words, the dignity of work. And that means, of course, making sure we have an increase to the federal minimum wage. Some of the things I already raised with having child care in place and having a good system when it comes to work-family leave and making sure that you have the ability to organize. All of this is going to make a difference in this gig economy if we have a president who takes it on and doesn't just talk about helping workers, but actually does it. Next, I mentioned this competitive agenda, and what this is about is governing from opportunity and not from chaos. It's allowing people to start small businesses, and it is also making sure that they have access to capital and have the ability to export. It's hooking our education system into our economy, and there's been a lot of talk, as you all know, about free college and things like that. I think the best way is to come up with a plan, and I have one, that makes sure we have the incentives for people to go into jobs where we have the openings. Right now, to give you a sense, and it's a great place to bring it up here at IBEW, we have projected to have 74,000 job openings for electricians in the next 10 years. We are going to have around that same amount for plumbers. We're going to have over 100, this is in our country. And this is not, well, there'll be more of those jobs, but there's ones we fill. These are ones that we don't think we're going to fill. Over 100,000 openings for nurse assistants. Over 1 million openings for home health care workers. So you've got to look at where those openings are, and it especially matters in a state like Iowa with a low unemployment rate. And you figure out how do you fill those jobs. Well, you create incentives for people to go into those areas, like 1- and 2-year degrees being free, like doubling the Pell Grants for college, making it easier to pay back loans if you go into those kinds of areas, and allowing all students to refinance all their loans. So all of this is related to making sure that we have an economic plan that works for our country. Last thing I'd bring up is economic justice and shared prosperity. We all know we have systematic racism, not just in our criminal justice system, but also in our economic system. The stories, and you can look at the numbers in terms of poverty and other things that make it obvious, but the stories are what brings it home. The African American woman who shows up at a maternity ward in New Orleans and says her hands are swollen and the doctors blow her off and her baby dies. The vice president at a company, African American in my state, who goes shopping and is followed by store security the entire time. The numbers when it comes to the amount of money African American women make compared to white men. It is pretty astounding. And so what you need there is economic justice, strong enforcement of anti-discrimination laws, making sure that we have strong K-12 education systems, and so the money gets to where it needs to go. Part of this is looking at what our economic needs are and how we best compete in the world. And we best compete if we have an economy that's functioning for everyone, if we make sure we're filling the jobs that we have. Some of those jobs are well paying, that's great. Some of them aren't as well paying. And in those kinds of areas, we have to make sure that we've got retirement and we've got pensions and other things that work for people. And if you look at it that way, all of it kind of falls into place, and you can explain it to people and bring them with you. And that's what this plan is all about. So I just end with one story. I remember when I was growing up, driving up to Duluth, actually, with my dad, because as I mentioned, my grandparents lived up in that area. And there was a billboard they put out at one point when the economy was really bad. And it said, because Duluthians are kind of up to the point, and it said, last one to leave, turn off the lights. Because the point was that they were having big economic trouble up there, and that they didn't know if they were going to come back. They did. They came back by, for one thing, there was people that stood up for our iron ore mining there and made sure the iron ore mines kept open. But then also, they came up with new ideas for a new economy. Up there, it happened to be tourism, and it worked big time. They did more with infrastructure. They brought in more small businesses. They caught the wave on a personal jet company that was actually based in Duluth. They started a company called Epicurean that makes cutting boards. They just did a lot of things that brought their economy back. And so I was able to see firsthand in my own life and from my own relatives what it means if you think ahead and you respond to the changing economy. And right now they are a thriving town. A cold town under 22 inches of snow right now, but a thriving town. And I take that to heart. And I think that's what we need to do with our country when it comes to this gig economy. On the right to work side, there's actually a major legislation to make it easier for unions to organize, to stop retaliation, and to just simply make it easier to organize. And I think that would be a good idea. And I think people have to remember, first of all, unions are getting more and more popular. We were talking about this out in the hallway. They're like over 60, almost 65% now. And I think a lot of it has to do that people are feeling they're left out in this economy and some of the things I talked about. So I just see a change going on in this country, which will be that workers, and you've seen it in strikes and other things, workers can't get by with some of these salaries, and so they're going to start pushing for change. And I think it's actually exciting because it just rebalances things, and it's going to be better in the long haul. I think we should increase the federal minimum wage, and $15 an hour is what the Fight for 15 that we're engaging in now, and it's really unbelievable. It has not been increased since when, nearly a decade, it hasn't been increased. And I was there for the first one, and it is, where is it at? It's at the federal, 725, yeah. I mean, it's an unbelievable thing. Beyond even 1 and 2 year degrees by doubling the Pell Grants, which right now are $6,000 a year, and you could go up to $12,000 a year under my plan, which is simply paid for by some changes to the capital gains tax that are long overdue. You double the number of Pell Grants, amount of Pell Grants to $12,000 a year to offset, and then you have also double the income level from $50,000 a year to $100,000 a year. So that would be in addition to the 1 and 2 year degrees being free, and that would be free up money for some other things. There's actually the Butch-Lewis Act covers some of these pensions, and the ones that are really a focus right now are those that are some of them are Teamster pensions and other things, and a lot of them hit the Midwest. That's why they were called the Central States Pension Plan, and there was something tucked in a budget bill, and I remember those of us from the Midwest said, this sounds bad. It's called Central States Pension. It probably affects us because we had no calculation of what it did, and it turned out to have been a very bad deal, to the point where under both, actually, the Obama and Trump administrations, they've been trying to change that. And so far, though, there's been no help in advancing the bill that would fix it. So that's one. And then the mine workers as well. That pension is right on the front burner. But a lot of this is just having the will to get this done and fix it. And then also anticipating that a lot of these new workers are not going to have pensions. They may not even have 401ks. And that's why I led with a different way to look at retirement as well for some of the new workers. And I think a lot of people are scared right now because you've got a president that made all kinds of promises to people about prescription drugs and about their retirements and about the economic system, and he's basically hasn't kept those promises. I remember on election night he said he was going to do a big infrastructure thing, you know, like his name's on his hotels. Well, that just hasn't happened. He walked from those negotiations. And he said that he was going to do something about pharmaceutical prices, and he hasn't done that. So people have been waiting, and I think that a lot of our discussion should start focusing on some of those issues. The 10% of the people that voted for Barack Obama and Donald Trump, the 10% of Donald Trump's voters, they're open to this. They're open to start talking about this economics. And I think the last thing, because some of them were union workers, this idea, the judges that he's put in, that he hasn't done anything to fix, he's getting mad hearing about this. The ability to organize, that it's on us to make that case to those workers. All right, thank you very much. And maybe we'll walk around a little, talk to everyone. But thanks for being here today. We're having our big event tonight, but this was a good way to get it started and to hear about this, what's happening right now in this state when it comes to state legislation, and then really planning for the future for this gig economy. It isn't coming, as I said, it's here, and we've got new kinds of jobs that are coming on board, and we want to make sure that those workers are compensated, that they have the ability to organize, that we have the training that they need, because it's the only way we're going to be able to compete economically like we should across the world. So I actually think it is exciting opportunity that we have here, but not if we're just dividing people all the time like this president does. And he doesn't. One of the things a leader should do is not just rest on their laurels. And you look at, that's what he did, right? He came in, the downturn, we've gotten out of a lot of it, thanks to our workers and thanks to our businesses. He comes in as president, and instead of rising to the new challenges, he gloats about what our workers and our businesses had done to get us out of the downturn. And he takes responsibility. And then when anything starts going wrong, like how he's dealt with the rest of the world, or the oil waivers that he gave out, or the farm bankruptcies up 25%, then he blames other people. He blames the head of the Federal Reserve, or he blames Barack Obama, or he blames the city of Baltimore, or he blames the entire country of Denmark. Who does that? He did that. And what a true leader does is rises to the challenges of our time. And this is one of our major challenges, but it can be an opportunity. We shouldn't see it just as a negative. We have all this new stuff coming in, new jobs, new ideas, and we've got to make sure that our systems work so that we are able to rise to those international competitive pressures, and that we're also able to pay people the way they should be paid, and so they can raise a family. And right now, think about this, for 4 years, we've been stagnant when it comes to sort of updating our laws and making things better for how people are paid, for how they're compensated for their work, so that they can get child care. As we have more and more women in the workforce, and more young people that want to be in the workforce, we've got to start looking at the whole nature of work and how we're doing it. And I actually think it's a good challenge to have, but the one thing that we know is he has not met that challenge, and we can. So, thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like this political content, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching, and Happy New Year.